So this crazy thing happened back in college. I'd actually dumped Sharon like a month before Halloween, after finding out she'd been reading all my texts and tracking my location without telling me. She totally freaked when I called her out on it, saying she only did it because she loved me so much and needed to make sure I was safe. That should have been my first clue she wasn't going to let things end easy, but I was kinda dumb back then. My friends were being super pushy about getting me out for Halloween. They kept saying I needed to stop hiding in my room, since Sharon had been telling everyone I was the bad guy and making up all these stories about how I'd been sneaking around on her, sleeping with other women. I'd spent like 2 weeks just sitting in my dorm playing video games and avoiding everyone's weird looks, so maybe they had a point about getting out there. This party was at one of those huge houses quite a ways off campus that some rich seniors had rented. The place was actually pretty sweet, with tons of room and this crazy setup in the backyard with fire pits everywhere. They'd gone all out with these creepy decorations too, like super realistic zombies popping out from behind trees and this weird fog machine that made everything look extra spooky. I wasn't feeling it at first, but then I spotted Becky. She had on this nurse costume that was, well, definitely not hospital approved. She has these gorgeous, super bright blue eyes that seemed to light up whenever she caught me looking, and she was being pretty flirty with me from the start. I totally wasn't expecting to click with anyone that night, but there was just something about her that pulled me in. Maybe it was the way she kept making these silly jokes about giving me a checkup, or how she actually seemed interested in my lame stories about my gaming marathon. We ended up hanging by this fire pit for quite a while, and she kept finding these little ways to get closer to me. Her hand would brush against mine real casual-like, or she'd lean in super close to say something over the music. At one point, she even pretended to be cold just so I'd move closer to the fire with her. It felt pretty amazing having someone interested in me again, until I noticed something strange. There was this girl in this sleek Catwoman costume who kept showing up everywhere we went. At first, I figured it was just random. Tons of people were moving around the party. But then I started noticing how she was always facing our way, always watching us, never moving on. She'd be standing by the snack table when we grabbed chips, then somehow already be near the dance floor when we moved that way. I tried playing it cool and focusing on Becky, who was getting more playful by the minute. She wanted to grab drinks from inside, so we pushed through the crowd together. The house was packed with people in tons of wild costumes, but somehow, I kept spotting that black mask lurking in the background. Every time we turned a corner, there she was. So Becky led me to this quieter spot near the kitchen, where we could actually hear each other talk. She was telling me about her classes and touching my arm all flirty, and for a minute, everything seemed pretty perfect. Then, someone brushed past us, way too close. When I turned around, the Catwoman was right there, and something about the way she moved made my stomach drop super fast. I knew those movements. I'd seen them tons of times before. That slight head tilt when she was annoyed, the way her hands rested on her hips when she was mad. That wasn't just some random girl in a costume. That was Sharon, and she was crazy mad. My whole body went ice cold. I tried acting normal with Becky, but I could feel Sharon's eyes burning through that mask. She wasn't saying anything, wasn't doing anything obvious, but her message was pretty clear. She was super not okay with me and Becky. She just stood there, staring, until Becky suggested we go check out the Halloween photo booth upstairs. Now I started making up all these excuses to move away from Becky, trying to avoid drama. But every time I thought I'd put quite a ways between us, Sharon would appear somewhere new. She was always there, watching, following, making sure I knew there was no getting away. She even followed us to the photo booth, standing right behind the photographer, while Becky tried to get me to pose with her. Then my phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped it when I saw what popped up. Sharon had been taking tons of pictures of me and Becky all night, pics I never even knew she was taking. Some were from across the room, some from right behind us, and the last message just said, "You can't escape, until I let you. There were like 20 photos, each one showing how close she'd gotten without us noticing. I was starting to freak out pretty bad. Every time I thought I'd lost her, she'd show up again, near the stairs, by the bathroom, in the kitchen. It was like she could predict where I was going to go. She even appeared in the reflection of the upstairs hallway mirror when I was trying to hide out for a minute. Becky tried getting my attention a few times, but I was too scared to even look at her now. Things got super intense when I decided to grab my jacket and bail. I headed to this room where everyone had thrown their coats, and there she was, sitting right on top of my jacket, still wearing that mask. I thought about saying something, confronting her, calling her out, but we both knew how easy it'd be for her to twist my words around. She was a master at that. No matter what I said, she'd make me look like the bad guy. I figured it was better to just ignore her and walk away. Be the better person. She didn't say anything either. She didn't move. Just sat there while I grabbed my stuff with shaking hands. The way she tilted her head reminded me of all those times she'd caught me in a lie when we were dating. The way she let me leave was actually worse than if she'd tried stopping me. It was like she was saying she didn't need to chase me anymore. She'd already won. She'd shown me that she could control everything, that she could appear whenever she wanted. As I headed for the door, I got one last text, a picture of me from literally 2 seconds ago, grabbing my jacket. I told Becky I wasn't feeling great. We had already swapped numbers earlier. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and told me to take care and to contact her later. I then headed back to my dorm. The party was over. For me. Then a couple weeks after all this went down, I heard that Sharon had started dating some guy from her bio class. Honestly, it took me by surprise after everything that happened at the Halloween party. But hey, I wasn't complaining. I felt sorry for that bio class guy, her next future victim. But that sorrow didn't last long, as I started dating Becky. Last October, I went to Germany with my girlfriend Melissa for what was supposed to be a nice extended long weekend. We had taken a few extra days off our work, giving us what was supposed to be a nice getaway to Germany. Supposed to be being the operative phrase. We'd heard about this huge pumpkin festival in Ludwigsburg and thought it would be cool to check it out. Got a super cheap train deal from the UK and found this cute little Airbnb cottage on the outskirts of town. We figured we'd get into the spirit of things and wear costumes to the festival. Nothing crazy. I went as a pirate, just an eye patch and a bandana really, and Melissa did the whole black cat thing with some ears and face paint. Looking back now, maybe we should have done more research about the local traditions. The weather wasn't great, but the festival itself was actually pretty awesome. At first. They had these massive pumpkin sculptures everywhere. Tons of food stalls with pumpkin everything. Soup, bread, even beer. The whole place smelled amazing. But then, that's when things started getting weird. We first spotted this guy in a Krampus mask around the wine tasting area. If you don't know what Krampus is, it's this creepy demon thing from European folklore. The mask was super detailed, with these huge horns and this twisted face. At first, we thought he was part of the festival entertainment, but something felt off about him. He just stood there, staring at us. Never moved to interact with anyone else. Never did any kind of performance. Just watched. We could hear these little bells on his costume jingling whenever he shifted position. Every time we moved to a different stall. He followed, keeping his distance, but always facing our direction. Melissa tried to joke about it, saying maybe he didn't approve of our Halloween costumes at what was clearly more of a harvest festival. But after an hour of this, I was starting to get seriously freaked out. When we finally decided to head back to our cottage, we saw him standing at the festival entrance, just watching us leave. We got back to the Airbnb around 9 p.m., thinking we'd left the whole weird situation behind us. We were sitting in the living room, having a beer and trying to laugh it off when we heard knocking at the front door. I opened it, but there was nobody there. Just this empty country road stretching into darkness. Then we heard a familiar jingling of bells. Melissa spotted him. The Krampus guy. He was standing by our gate, completely still, just staring at the house. We then made sure all the doors and windows were locked, but then we started hearing footsteps. They were circling the house. Melissa tried calling the police, but the signal out there was totally garbage. The call dropped before she could even give them our location. That's when the front door handle started turning. Hard. Like someone was really trying to get in. Forcefully. The bells were jingling right outside now, and it sounded like he was moving around the porch. We knew we couldn't stay there. The cottage was way too isolated, and this guy clearly wasn't going away. So we did something pretty risky. We snuck out the back door and just started running towards the town. He must have heard us, because soon enough, he was coming after us. The whole time. We could hear those bells behind us, trying to keep pace, but struggling to. Melissa finally got through to the police while we were escaping. Apparently, they were a bit bemused at first, but they said they'd send someone to meet us. That's when the bells stopped jingling, meaning the guy had stopped chasing us. He must have put 2 and 2 together and figured Melissa had called the police. By the time the police car finally showed up, the guy was long gone. The officers got out to search the area, but by then, he'd disappeared. The police drove us back to the cottage to get our stuff. We were obviously not staying there another night. Everything looked exactly how we'd left it, which was kinda weird considering how that guy had been trying to break in. We walked up to the front door, and there it was. The Krampus mask was sitting on the porch, placed real careful-like, staring up at us with its twisted face. I picked it up, and my whole body went cold. Whoever had been wearing it was gone, but the way it was positioned, facing the door like that, gave me the chills. The police never found the guy. We grabbed our stuff and got the first train back to London the next morning. This was a kinda crazy Halloween, and I'm never gonna forget it. I was chilling at home by myself that night, with no plans to give out candy or deal with trick-or-treaters. Our porch light was off since that's how you tell kids to skip your house. And, yeah, I wasn't going trick-or-treating either. Figured I was too old for that. It had been super rough at school all week, so I was gonna relax with snacks and watch something scary on Netflix. My parents were at some party or whatever, which was pretty sweet since I had the place all to myself. The night was going okay, with just a few kids walking around. I watched them a bit from my window, seeing their parents hanging out on the sidewalk. Some kids hit our doorbell early on, but I ignored it. They left pretty quick, probably bummed, but I didn't really care. By 9-ish, things got pretty quiet in the neighborhood. Not tons of kids anymore, and it was getting super dark. I was finally getting comfy on the couch with chips and this kinda cheesy horror movie when I heard something at our back door. It wasn't super loud, but it was weird, like someone messing with the handle. I figured it was probably the wind or something. But then it happened again. This slow, careful rattling, like someone trying to be quiet, but doing a terrible job. I froze up. Our house sits back quite a ways from the street, and since the lights were off, anyone outside would think nobody was home. That's when I remembered something crazy my mom said before. Houses with no lights on Halloween are kinda easy targets for trouble, since people think that no one may be around. At first, I thought it could just be some kid being dumb, but then the door rattled harder, and I knew this was gonna be bad. I got up super slow and quiet, then sneaked toward the kitchen. There's this small window in the back door, so I crouched down to look. My stomach dropped when I saw them. 3 older guys in dark hoodies, 17 or 18 maybe. One had a flashlight, and the others were messing with our lock. My heart started going crazy. I was trapped inside, all alone, while these kids were breaking in. I wanted to call the cops, but my phone was still sitting on the coffee table. I was pretty mad at myself, but stayed low, moving back toward the hall. Then I heard the lock breaking and the door creaking open. They were inside. I could hear them whispering stuff, but it was too quiet to make any of it out. I ducked into our laundry room, which is next to the kitchen, and pressed against the wall. I held super still, trying to hear where they were walking. One of them said something about grabbing stuff fast. Another one was acting all cocky, saying they had tons of time since nobody was home. My hands were shaking like crazy, but I tried to keep it together. If they didn't know I was there, maybe I could just hide until they left. Their footsteps got closer, moving through our kitchen and into the living room. I heard them going through all our stuff, yanking drawers open and slamming them shut. They were taking their time, which was super scary. One of them laughed and said, "Electronics are our candy tonight." The others thought that was pretty funny, and it gave me major chills. I knew they were probably grabbing our game stuff and tablets. My parents' laptop was sitting out in the living room, and thinking about them taking it made me feel sick. I stayed super still against the wall, hoping they wouldn't check the laundry room. But then, one of them mentioned checking the bedrooms. I heard them heading down the hall toward my room, and that's when I really freaked. That's where all the valuable stuff was: Mom's jewelry, my gaming PC, and if they decided to check the laundry next, I'd be caught. I knew I had to move fast and get help. I moved along the wall, towards the back door they'd broken, trying to be quiet. It was still open, and if I could sneak out without making a noise, I might get away. I stepped super careful, but the floor kept making tiny creaks. Their voices were getting farther away, so I had a chance. I made it to the door and pushed it open a bit more, praying it wouldn't make noise. Right when I stepped outside, one of them yelled, "Check the laundry!" I ran for it and didn't look back. My feet hit the grass and I booked it to the side gate. I could hear them inside getting all crazy confused. One of them started cussing when they figured out someone was there and had gotten away. I made it to the side of the house, trying to catch my breath, and hid behind the fence. My heart was going so fast I thought I might pass out. But I knew I couldn't just sit there. They might come looking outside. I took one big breath and ran to my neighbor's place, Mr. Scribner. I ran across his lawn and started pounding on his door. It felt like forever, but finally, his porch light came on and the door opened. He looked kinda confused, but I just told him real quick that some kids had broken in and we needed the cops. He acted cooler than I expected, just nodded, grabbed his phone, and called them. I stayed on his porch, shaking like crazy from everything that happened. We watched from his window as the kids came out of my house with their backpacks full of our stuff. They were trying to run, but before they got very far, police lights started flashing down the street. The cops showed up just in time to catch them at the end of our street. I watched the officers stop them and shine lights in their faces. The kids tried acting all normal, but they were obviously busted. After the cops had them, I walked back home with Mr. Scribner. The place was trashed, drawers open everywhere, stuff thrown all over. But we got lucky. They hadn't taken anything important yet. We'd caught them just in time. That night, I sat in the living room, way too freaked out to sleep, and waited for my parents to come home. The house felt super weird, like it wasn't really ours anymore. I kept thinking about those kids laughing, acting like it was all just some game to them. That Halloween was straight up terrifying. Back 12 years ago, when I was 12 years old, I was trick-or-treating with my dog, Benji, a German Shepherd. Yeah, you heard that right, with my dog. He was my best friend. Benji was this super big, strong dog with a coat that was mostly black with some tan markings. He had these crazy, intense brown eyes that kind of seemed to see right through you. But even with his intimidating looks, Benji was a total softie with our family. That Halloween night was pretty chilly, so I had on this thick costume. I was gonna be a mummy. I'd wrap myself in tons of white fabric strips, leaving just enough space for my eyes to peek out. Benji had on this superhero cape I'd made from an old red pillowcase. It wasn't much, but it made him look super adorable and heroic at the same time. This ended up being a pretty fitting costume for him. We started our trick-or-treating route in our neighborhood. It was this quiet suburb with tons of families and kids. Usually, on Halloween, the streets would be packed with little ghosts, witches, and superheroes. But this year, there didn't seem to be as many kids out as usual, and the streets felt kinda empty. As we walked from house to house, Benji trotted alongside me, his tail wagging like crazy. He seemed to be super into the excitement of the night, even if he didn't get why we were going door to door. At each house, I'd hold his leash tight and tell him to stay put while I rang the doorbell. Everyone got such a kick out of seeing a dog out trick-or-treating. We'd been out for about an hour when I first noticed something was off. We were on this street. I don't recall what it was called, but it was quite a ways from our house. That's when I saw him. A tall figure standing at the end of the street. He was wearing this Saw mask, like from those horror movies. The mask was white with red swirls on the cheeks, and it gave me the creeps. At first, I figured it was just another trick-or-treater, but then I realized something super weird. He wasn't going up to any houses. He was just standing there, watching us. Benji noticed too. Benji let out this low growl. I decided to turn around and head back the way we came. As we walked, I kept glancing back, and the figure was following us, keeping the same distance. My heart started racing like crazy. I picked up the pace, and Benji matched my stride. We turned down the next street, hoping to lose our follower. But when I looked back again, he was still there. That's when it hit me. I totally recognized that walk. It was Jake, my older brother Tom's arch-enemy from high school. He had this real wannabe macho man kind of walk. Jake was 18 or 19 now, and he'd always been a big bully. Tom was away at college at the time, and I guess Jake had decided to turn his attention to me instead. Jake worked at the local gas station. He hadn't gotten into college like my brother had. I'd heard my parents talking about how he'd been causing tons of trouble around town lately. And now, here he was, following me on Halloween night. I started walking faster, almost jogging now. Benji was right by my side, his leash super tight. We cut through a neighbor's yard, hoping the shortcut would throw Jake off. But as we came out the other side, there he was, still following us. By now I was really scared. We were pretty far from home, and the streets were kinda empty. Knocking on someone's door for help seemed super risky. They might not answer, and Jake could catch up while we waited. I decided to make a run for it. We sprinted down the street, my mummy wrappings coming loose as we ran. Benji was right there with me, matching my pace. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us. Jake was running too. At least trying to. He was a pretty big guy, if you know what I mean. His size slowed him down, but his longer legs still covered quite a ways. We rounded a corner and I risked taking a look back. Jake was closer now, maybe 50 feet behind us. In the streetlight, I could see the Saw mask clearly, and it was even creepier up close. Suddenly, Benji stopped. I tugged on his leash, trying to get him to keep running, but he wouldn't budge. He turned to face Jake, his hackles raised and teeth bared. I'd never seen Benji look so fierce. It even scared me. Jake slowed down when he saw Benji. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, but then he started walking towards us again, reaching into his pocket for something. That's when Benji sprang into action. With this super loud bark, he lunged forward, pulling the leash right out of my hand. In a flash, he was on Jake, knocking him to the ground. The Saw mask went flying off, showing Jake's totally surprised face. Honestly, I couldn't stop laughing, though I wouldn't have wanted to be on the receiving end. Benji didn't bite Jake, but he had him pinned to the ground, growling like crazy. Jake was yelling for Benji to get off, all his tough guy act completely gone. I didn't know what to do. I was super scared for Benji. Jake could hurt him, and that thought terrified me, but I was also amazed at how brave Benji was being. After a few minutes, I called Benji back to me. To my relief, he came right away, leaving Jake on the ground and returning to my side. Jake scrambled to his feet. His tough guy act was totally gone now. He looked scared and angry at the same time. He started yelling at me, saying he was just trying to scare me and that my stupid dog had attacked him for no reason. Just then, we heard sirens in the distance. Someone must have heard all the noise and called the cops. Jake shrugged and gave us the finger, then took off running in the opposite direction. We started walking home. I was kind of shaken, but okay. As we walked, a police car drove by slowly. The officer inside asked if everything was all right. I waited a sec, but then decided to tell him everything that had happened. He took down all the details and drove off. When we finally got home, my parents were totally freaking out. They'd been calling my cell phone, which I realized I'd accidentally left at home. I told them everything that had happened. My dad was really worried and angry. The next day, we found out that Jake had skipped town. Apparently, he'd been mixed up in tons of other trouble and decided to leave before the police could question him about what happened on Halloween. I was pretty relieved, but also kinda sad for him. I wondered what had made him so angry and mean. As for Benji and me, well, we had tons more adventures together over the years, but none quite as crazy or scary as that Halloween night. Benji lived to a super old age of 14, staying by my side through middle school and high school, and even my first year of college. He passed away peacefully a few years back, surrounded by our family. I'll always be grateful for all the years we had together, and especially for that Halloween night when he showed just how brave and loyal he truly was. Miss you, Benji.